Welcome to Greater Good Radio Hawaii, where leaders inspire leaders. Greater Good Radio Hawaii is dedicated to social entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Evan Leong, and with me is my co-host, Carrie Leong.
Mahalo, Evan. Today's guest is Rick Blangiardi, Senior Vice President and General Manager of KGMB Channel 9. Rick started his career as an assistant football coach and eventually made his way into the broadcast media. Please welcome to Greater Good Radio, Rick Blangiardi. Welcome to our show, Rick.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Carrie. Evan, nice to be here.
So can you tell us about your path, how you started as an assistant coach, and then all of a sudden getting involved in television?
Yeah, I guess if I was really good in coaching, I'd probably still be there. But no, actually, when I was, fairly young, and the game of football really played a big part in my life and development. Actually, quite frankly, the inspiration to go to college. I was first in my family and was able to go to school as a result of playing the game.
What position were you?
I was a linebacker. In high school, I was a lineman. I was a offensive and defensive tackle. When I got to college, I started standing up. I went from a 4-point to a 2-point stance. Played linebacker all through college. Anyway, I was really deeply influenced by the game. In fact, I used to say it was more than a game for me. It really. And so as a result, really wanted to get into the coaching business and really thought that would be my career, and actually spent all of my 20s coaching. I coached at the University of Connecticut before I came back home to Hawaii. And I say home, began really in 1965-66 when I played at the university, then went back east to graduate because of some family circumstances. But because of my relationship with Coach Price, he invited me to come back out. And so I came back to Hawaii and was here for quite a while, and really thought I was going to keep doing that. And we were having some real success with it and had some great years and privilege of coaching some great players and great moments, both in the old stadium and opening up the new stadium.
So what moved you to television?
Well, my then wife was pregnant with my now firstborn. He's 28 years old. And we weren't making very much money in those days. I'll be real honest with you. I was defensive coordinator, associate head coach, had a master's degree. We worked pretty much around the clock. It was never ending. And I was making around $15,600 a year in those days. And after taxes, it was a lot less than that. And the prospect of losing her income in those days, she taught for the DOE, and trying to do it, I was at a point in my life where I really needed to make more money. So it was driven on that premise.
And you went from an assistant coach to doing sales. Yeah. So how were those related, and what were the challenges of doing sales?
Well, I never really thought of myself as a salesperson, but I knew that if I ever transitioned into business, I'd have to think in terms of probably selling something. And honestly, television just seemed better than insurance or sporting goods. With all due respect to those two professions, I had known coaches that had done that and kind of ran back to coaching. And TV was just one of those things that they said, well, you can sell sports, and I don't know. It just was what was available at the time through a series of circumstances, and I didn't have to leave Hawaii. And really, quite honestly, I didn't know what I was getting into. I mean, I had to deal with Larry Price in those days where, if we won, he did the interviews, and if we lost, I did them. So, I got to know a few people at the TV station. Joe Moore in those days was at KGMB, and I knew the then general sales manager, a guy named Bob Fox, who ultimately hired me. And we were owned by C. Seftel in those days. So I really got fortunate. I sort of backed into a business that now, 29 years later, has been my career.
So what was the transition like? You're on the field, the guys got to listen to you.
Yeah.
And then you go into another situation where you're kind of the new guy on the block.
It was really a huge transition. I mean, in retrospect, first of all, the guy who hired me really kind of neglected to tell everybody I was coming. And in those days, KGMB was the dominant television station, had the dominant sales staff, and it was like they didn't even have a desk or a cubby for me. I sat next to a telex machine, and I think everybody thought I was just the general sales manager's crazy idea. I'd be there for a week and be gone or something. Only the circumstances of my life didn't allow that to happen, albeit I will tell you honestly, I seriously miss coaching a whole lot. And right away, because I had such a strong identity with it. And you're absolutely right. I went from a Friday night of being the guy that was, running the weight room, was a recruiting coordinator, was doing all this stuff, and totally immersed with our players and fellow coaches, and just, in that incredibly intense environment, to go into a different one where, it was almost, people were indifferent if I was even there. And I kind of had to reinvent myself and create a whole different identity.
But you actually don't really need to reinvent yourself, because in the position that you're in, it's almost like coaching. You got to recruit, You got to motivate. You have to console sometimes.
Right.
You have to deal with issues. You have to think on your feet.
Yeah, that's astute observation, because really what began to happen for me, but not right away, Evan, was I started to draw from, if you will, the transferable skills. I mean, having sold a game plan, if you will, to our defense, or even maybe say breakout position to the linebackers and how we'd stop a team, was its own form of selling. And same with recruiting, as far as being able to meet people and engage people, get them to trust and like you, and along the lines of what you just said. So once I kind of got my head in the game, I started thinking about those very things. And clearly so much of who I was anyway, and have really tried to still be, has been rooted in the sense of team and being competitive. And the good news is that at least television afforded me an opportunity where every day seemed like game day instead of just 11 or 12 Saturdays a year. And it was real challenging, and at the same time, and really the driver was, it was a lot more rewarding. And I remember in those days, the general sales manager hired me and said, well, Rick, if you really work at this, maybe even half as hard as you work in coaching, maybe in about 3 years' time, you could make $50,000 a year. And with a baby coming and the possibility of that sounded like all the money in the world to me. And honestly, I left coaching for almost the same money that I was making, at KGMB. They paid me almost the same exact amount of money. But it was more about there was an upside if you could perform. But I didn't get out of the blocks real fast. Honestly, I spent a fair amount of time feeling sorry for myself in the beginning.
Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for more on Greater Good Radio.